Today we have Dr. Amy McGovern. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a little bio on you here. You're the director for the NSF AI Institute for Research on Trustworthy AI in Weather, Climate, and Coastal Oceanography. Changes in weather patterns, oceans, sea level rise, and disaster risk amplify the need for accelerated AI research in the environmental sciences. AI2ES is a convergent multi-sector NSF Trustworthy AI Institute led by the University of Oklahoma that brings together researchers in AI, atmospheric science, ocean science, and risk communication to create novel, trustworthy AI techniques that improve our ability to understand, predict, and communicate high-impact weather. This is good. Your research
And whenever
focus. Sorry, go ahead.
whenever people read me the bio from the website, it's always interesting to hear how people emphasize the different things.
Yes, yes. It says here your research focuses on developing and applying AI and machine learning methods for real-world applications with a special interest in high-impact weather. Your current work focuses on weather analytics or physical data science. Your students and you are developing physics-based trustworthy AI methods as well as explainable AI. And you apply those methods to high-impact weather phenomena, including tornadoes, hail, severe wind events, flooding, drought, and aircraft turbulence. So are you at the U of Oklahoma?
Yes, it's University of Oklahoma, but it goes by OU.
Yeah, oh, okay. And when I was a much younger man, just starting my storm chasing days, I chase for Environment Canada, by the way. I don't know if you knew that, but I have a great interest in tornadic science. So I headed on down in the 80s to hang out with a guy named Howard Bluestein. I don't know if you know or have heard
Yeah,
of. Yeah,
yeah, everybody knows him.
he's a pioneer.
Yeah, he's still here.
Is he really?
I take it you're about to get an extra guest into the podcast.
Hey, who is this?
It's one of the dogs. We have two. Her name's Miri.
Oh, Mary. Hello. I could not do that with my dog. Just too big. Nice.
I think she's trying to tell me it's dinner time.
Yeah. So Howard Bluestein and um the rest of the crew down there kind of invented the field, right? Like he
Oh
was
yeah.
one of the pioneers for sure. And Oklahoma, correct me if I'm wrong, are you guys still number one in EF5s for tornadoes for states?
That's an interesting question. That's a Harold question because he does all those statistics.
Yeah.
Um, I think so, but
Yeah,
Tornado Alley is starting to shift a little bit.
is it really more easterly?
Yeah,
It is.
with the way the climate is changing, the
Yeah.
Tornado Alley is shifting. But we're certainly still the hail capital too. I'm on roof number 4 in 20 years of living here.
Is that right? Hail. Wow. So your farmers must have special insurance then I would think.
I would assume so.
Yeah.
Um, but we also pay a lot more for insurance than like other parts of the country. Well, I was going to say normal parts of the country. We're all normal.
Yeah.
Mary, Mary, you need to get out of my lap.
I remember
No.
camping on that same trip in the late 80s. I remember camping in Oklahoma uh, with a tent at a campsite, and the owner was looking kind of worried. And I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Well, there's a thunderstorm coming." Really? Is it going to be bad? She said, "Every one of these things could be bad. We don't know." No. But that
That is kind of
look,
how it goes here.
yeah, that look on her face off into the west, like unforgettable for me, you know?
I moved here from Massachusetts where you could get thunderstorms that were just thunderstorms.
Yeah.
And moved down here and like uh, 90% of our rain is convective,
Is it
right? It's
really?
just yeah, I mean, we don't get much stratiform rain. And it's just when it rains, it literally pours,
Yeah.
right? And the hail is not uncommon in the spring.
Mm. And you get flash flooding much?
Yeah, all
Yeah.
over town. My favorite is the fact that they named one of the streets Flood.
Oh,
They named it for that for a reason.
okay. All right. Tell me a bit about your affiliated organizations and what your involvement with those organizations is. What's a day in the life of Dr. Amy McGovern like?
a lot of things. I mean, I direct AI to ES, so you read the long name of AI to ES. And for the last 4.5 years, that has been the majority of my life because directing a large scale institute is a lot of work.
Mm.
We have 100 people on our mailing list. We have somewhere between 60 and 70 on our payroll at any given time. So that's a lot of
Ah,
people. Even though we're not paying all of them full time, right? We're paying pieces of them,
yeah, yeah.
but it's still a lot of people. And just making sure that we're managing all of that is a lot of work. So a day in the life of me is a lot of that. This semester and this
Yep.
very, week, we're working on the renewal for it. And so it finds me writing a lot of writing,
Hmm.
proposal writing.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I have a bunch of postdocs and I have a bunch of grad students. So I try to meet with them and make sure they're on task and that we're
Wow.
doing cool things.
Ah, the life of a
And I do a bunch of
professor.
service too. I mean, if you want the day in the life, I also am the editor in chief for the AI journal that AMS has now.
Oh,
So we
really?
have a AI for the Earth Sciences, and I'm the editor in chief for that journal.
Oh, nice. Nice. Oh, that's good to know. You are the director of NSF AI Institute for Research on Trustworthy AI. So, National Science Foundation for those uh, not American. So, trustworthy AI and weather. What do you mean by trustworthy AI? Is there a group that does untrustworthy work in this area?
Well, so when the AI Institute's call came out, they were like slotted into different research areas.
Hmm.
And so there's been a group of them. We were in the original seven that were funded, and in
Okay.
that original seven, it was a like focus on foundational, and I don't remember the entire seven. There were three that were agriculture based, but we entered into the trustworthy, and the goal of the trustworthy section was to under. Oh, dinner just appeared for the dog. Um, the goal of the trustworthy part was to understand more of what it means to be trustworthy AI, and then be able to create the trustworthy AI. It isn't so
Yeah.
much that people are not creating trustworthy AI or deliberately creating untrustworthy, but that we didn't know what trustworthy means,
Hmm.
right? And so that's a large part of what we do is we try to study what does it mean to be for AI to be trustworthy for our end users, particularly for weather and climate. Right. So, and the end users that we're focusing on in the first 5 years of AI2S are professional end users. So we're looking at forecasters, emergency managers, government organizations that might be using the forecast. Why would they trust an AI forecast or why would they not trust it? Likewise. And then what do we need to do to change that?
Yeah. 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 And so, what, how does it actually function? What is it that you create and how does it actually work? What, take us through the
There's a
process.
lot of different, when I mentioned that there are a lot of people working with AI2ES, so there isn't one AI2ES product, right?
Ah, okay.
So we take a use inspired case. That's the other part of the very long name. NSF named us, by the way. We had a smaller name that matched our acronym, but they
Uh-huh.
renamed us. But the use inspired cases, like we look at convective weather. You were talking about storm chasing. Convective
Mhm.
weather's one of the ones we look at. We look at tropical cyclones. We look at subseasonal forecasting, winter weather, and the coastal oceanography part of our name, right? And so
Mhm.
the answer to your question might be to dive into one of those in depth. And convective is one of the first ones we did because we wanted to do those studies of what it meant to be trustworthy.
Mhm.
And in order to do that, we needed a product that you could actually test. And convective was already the most mature with a product that we
Mm.
could actually go test. And so that's one of the first ones our risk communication researchers, who are social scientists, created a protocol to go interview the actual end users, the forecasters and the emergency managers,
Mhm.
based on the two products. So we had a product that was doing hail prediction 24 to 48 hours in advance, and another product that was in real time telling you what the classification of the storms were. So, like, is it going to be a supercell? Is it linear? Is it I'm doing this off the top of my head, quasi-linear, all the things it could be. Non-supercell, just a storm. And they created a protocol to interview with the forecasters to find out what they thought about these different products. And so that took the first few years to do because social science research with real humans takes a while. You got to actually interview them, and then you got to study what you did learned in the interview, and then come back out with that paper to figure out what it is. That paper actually just came out. It's in the Weather and Forecasting Journal. I am an author on it, but I am in no means the lead author. The lead author is Mariana Keynes, who was a postdoc at the time, and she's now a researcher who led the work. And it's really interesting to see what the forecasters wanted.
Mm.
They want to be able to they want to be able to have experience at the products,
Sure.
right? Which
Yeah.
but they also gain some trust through relational trust. Like if somebody they know has trusted it, they'll trust it some more. They gain
Mm.
some trust by humans being involved in it all the way
Mhm.
through.
Mhm.
They don't just want it to be an automated system all the way through. They want there to be human involvement.
Right.
Um, that some of them want, people make really broad statements about, oh, in the AI world anyway, if you can peer inside the model and do explainable AI, it's going to be more trustworthy. It turns out that not everybody cares about the explainable AI part.
Mm,
And that's an interesting thing because I think in some fields maybe they do, but for us, a lot of the forecasters actually really care about case studies. They want to see how well
right.
it works.
Right.
And they also know that every model is, I quoted this in a discussion earlier today. Every model is broken. Some of them are useful.
Hmm.
Um, they want to see where it breaks because
Mm,
they'd like to know what the limits of the model are.
yeah,
And
for
I think
sure.
that's also an interesting part of trust that we don't talk about much because everybody, I think, assumes, oh, we're going to go make this model and it's going to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a very good point. On the topic of trust, this is a nice tangent for us. I'm a Canadian, you're in the States. Throughout COVID, it occurred to me that the general public, especially in the US, experienced a mistrust in science. Not all
Yes.
people, but certain people. And when you hear things like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying the Dems manufactured a hurricane, right? What you must see it quite differently than the average person. We just think it's nuts. But how can you tell Marjorie Taylor Greene, hey, I'm Dr. Amy McGovern, and I can tell you for sure that that is impossible? What, how do you get them to listen? Is the question. How do you regain the trust that might have been lost or eroded during, say, COVID or other areas of time?
Or even just the last two hurricanes. There's a whole bunch of
Yes.
stuff going around on social media
Oh
that's
my
that's
goodness, the
wrong, and it's just very
misinformation.
hard.
Yeah.
It's a really important question you ask, and I don't have a full answer. I'm not a social scientist. I'm a computer scientist and a meteorologist.
Hmm.
I would say, the idealistic view is we need to keep communicating. We need to keep showing that what we're communicating is the right answer. The
Right.
government needs to keep communicating, here's where the hurricane really is. Here's where here's what's really happening. Here's the limits of what we know. That, by the way, I think is part of the problem. The communicating the uncertainty is really hard. And I think
Mm.
that the general public has a hard time understanding the uncertainty.
Yes.
Like, I think that is related to the trust as well, because, well, here's this cone and we don't precisely know where it's going to hit. Well, why don't you know where the hurricane's going to hit? Well, because it's hard.
Yeah, and you
But
can't just take out a Sharpie and say it's going to go here.
no comment. But, but, it's my answer directly to the controlling the hurricanes is we could control the weather like that. We would be doing a whole lot better at the
I know.
weather.
No kidding. No
So
kidding.
we're not clearly, but I think that it is an issue of trust, and we're just going to have to slowly regain it.
And it's
And
that
it
itself.
doesn't help that it's got people acting against it
I
right now.
know. I know. Is that like an indictment of the education system in general? Like, do people just not know how hurricanes are formed, where they come from, what hurricane season means, right?
I
Do
think
they
it's
just,
deeper than that. It's the educational system of how we need to trust social media and what we
mm,
need to learn to trust in social media. And AI drives some of this
it
because
does.
deep fakes are getting harder and harder to
I know.
detect. And people aren't trained to know when something is trustworthy or not. And, I think some of us of a certain age grew up knowing you don't read that newspaper because it's kind of full of crazy stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But I don't think that that same thing has been, people thought, oh, it's on the internet, it must be true.
Yeah.
And that's clearly not the case. But now we need to get that trust in there and we need to say this is a source that they're not going to publish crazy stuff. I was just reading a really interesting article related to all this yesterday about how the AP is going to call the United States election. I know not all of your listeners are in the United States, but how they're going to call our election. And it is actually a whole series on how you can trust the calls from the AP and how they're being really, really open and transparent about what they're doing so that you could trust the calls. And how if they don't know that they can call it, they're not going to call it because they don't want to make any mistakes. They would rather say, we don't know. And I think that's another answer to your trust question, right? Well,
Yeah.
how do you not know where that hurricane's going? Well, we really don't. Here's what we know. We know it's going to hit in this range to this range, and we want you to be prepared. And as it gets closer, we're going to be able to tell you a much more narrow window.
Hmm. Hmm.
We just need to be transparent about it. And again, if we could modify the weather, we could be transparent about that, but it isn't a possibility. It doesn't help in some of those cases that Hollywood likes to put some of that stuff out too,
Does. Does.
because then people think that it happens.
I know. I know. I'm uh I'm 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 wondering like in my academic career, I've been trying to get critical thinking brought into the curriculum of the high schools, at least in my province of Ontario, and had some luck with the last provincial government and zero luck with the current government. In amongst the critical thinking are also things like ethical reasoning, how to think about things ethically, and then also media literacy, teaching people
Right.
to be aware of information and to know how bias can skew and slant, to understand that there is the fomenting of Russian hackers and hackers from China and everywhere. And apparently America does it as well. We're not alone in meddling with other elections, right?
This would not surprise me, but
So it's
but
just,
I would add AI literacy to your list too,
oh, for
right? So
sure.
now it needs to not just be media literacy anymore because we really need to be AI literate to say,
Oh,
wait a minute,
absolutely.
the AI is giving me a bubble and
Absolutely.
it's giving me fake stuff too.
Yeah. And as soon as this book comes out on January 21st, you'll be able to tell people how to become AI literate. That's right,
Oh,
folks. Building a God, the ethics of
how
AI.
how do you have it there if it's not out?
Oh, I have ways. They get me advanced stuff. So, yeah. But yeah, I wanted to write a book that would let everybody know roughly what's the history of AI, where did it come from, how do we
So this
get
is your
here?
book.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And who are the big players? Who are the ones, really pushing uh, for the advancements, compute farms and all that kind of stuff. So,
There's it's really interesting how little ethics there are in some of the studies in some of these big
yeah.
players, and that's really fascinating to me. It's the move fast and break things,
Yep.
and that's part of gets back to the question you asked about trustworthy AI. I have a really serious concern for trustworthy AI for weather specifically, that somebody's going to put out a model, people are going to start trusting it, and then it's going to do something wrong, and then people are going to die
Yeah, right.
because we can't control that weather. But if we predict it, and for example, we could go two ways. We could say, this major thing's about to happen, people panic, and then they not, then they panic and they get in accidents or
Hmm.
something. Or we could just, oh, that's nothing to worry about. And then, 26 inches of rain later,
Mm.
everybody's dead because they drowned.
Hmm.
Like it's just there's both ways of that. And I really worry about it, especially with the way that industry is moving with they move fast and break things.
Oh, no kidding. Now, with your models, do you feed it a ton of data and then have it try to predict based on what has occurred, like precedents, like based
That's
on
certainly how all the AI models are trained, right? You're not
yeah.
trying to train it on fake data because you don't have any. You don't want to. You want to train it on the data. But, that gets us to the climate change question. You need to be able to train it on the most recent data because you asked me in the beginning, is tornado, are we still the queen or king of, EF5 tornadoes? I don't actually know, probably. But, is it shifting? Like if you train it all on data from the 80s, you're not going to get predictions for what's
Exactly.
happening now.
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
think actually Texas has more tornadoes than us, but it's only because they're a larger state.
they are. They are. And it's what, Texas, Oklahoma, what, Kansas,
Right.
all the way up to like,
But it's the last time I saw there was a diagram that had it shifting in towards Arkansas some of the time
oh,
because
is that
they're
right?
starting.
And
Yeah, because
Illinois
of the
is
east.
kind of in
Yeah.
there as well now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Have you seen any action? Or have you ever been out chasing? Have you seen any tornadoes?
I don't chase.
No.
I we just I don't know, as a family we didn't think that it was a good thing to do.
Yeah.
We did go out to the May 20 storm after it had passed. We spent most of it in the shelter because it only passed a couple miles from my house. When
Wow.
it was over, and clear that it wasn't going to hit us, we actually went out. Oklahoma's flat. For those viewers who are not understanding how flat it is here, we went to the overpass because that's where you can see things and
Hmm.
looked, and I could actually see like the end of it was so black. And
Really?
it was really, I don't know, it hit me emotionally really hard because that was the storm that killed so many kids. Went
No.
through two schools, and
No.
just seeing that, I was like, I just want to do something better. I want
Yeah,
to be able to help with
does it
that,
bring more meaning to your work then to try to bring better evidence and information for warning advanced warning?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Ohio, so I've had tornadoes for a long time.
Right.
But, I just seeing it like that it's visceral.
It is.
It was black.
Yeah.
Like I don't think people understand that the whole sky was black.
Yeah. and it was nasty. It was a wedge, right? It was just a big, massive wedge.
Yeah, yeah. I just
Yeah.
it that was a huge storm. But yeah, we don't chase. We've been hit by a bunch of hailstorms. We got hit by an RFD that
Hmm.
did some minimal damage. Mostly it's hail.
Right. Wow. Wow.
Talk to me about the hail.
Yeah.
Giant hail. Oklahoma. Readers who are not from this area, like having grown up on the upper Midwest and then living in
Yeah.
the Northeast, when they get hail, they get hail.
They do.
We we
Peace
we, do-
size.
do-
Yeah.
we get hail.
Softball size. Now, what's the deal? I talked to Mark Robinson. He's our big storm chaser up here on the Weather Network. And I recall the theory back in the day, or the hypothesis back in the day, was that hail is falls as precipitate. It comes down, then it gets pulled back up by a kind of a mesocyclonic action, and then it develops a layer of ice, and then it falls again, then it gets pulled up and gets another layer. And so if you got really big hail, right, you essentially have a number of repetitions of it going up and down. Has that changed? He's suggesting it might change.
I think it will change, and the reason is they just had a new project funded. It's called Ice Chip,
Hmm.
and it is a really cool new project. And they are going to be launching. So it's really hard. Before I say explain the launching part, it's really hard to get, for especially for people who maybe don't necessarily think about this outside the storm community. It's really hard to get the measurements inside a hailstorm while it's hailing, right? Because
Yeah.
no one wants to fly an aircraft into it because you have to be a little crazy to do that. And it's really hard to put the instruments in that way that don't get destroyed. So they've come up with this essentially like a sounding that's going to go up, but it's actually going to be hardened and it's going to do the instruments. It's going to go up and it's going to figure out how the storm is accreting the hail. And one of their initial ones, they've done two prototypes. I just saw them give a talk. One of the lead PIs on it gave a talk a couple weeks ago. One of them did come back down with hail around it, so it accreted around their prototype to make a
Oh.
hailstone. It did, but just by launching all of that and having the field experiments on it, they're going to have a much better understanding of how hail is actually forming because that's just something we don't have data on,
Hmm.
right? Because they were also working, another separate project was working on hardening an airplane to fly into the hailstorms, but it turns out that that's really, really challenging,
Yeah.
and
And
they didn't succeed.
isn't there a bunch of like electrical activity going on as well with?
Well, there's that too. But they do fly through hurricanes, so
Yeah.
I think they know how to handle that. It's more of the fact that you might bust your windshield at 30,000 feet, you know.
No, not a
I,
good not a good thing.
they were working, my understanding is they were working on hardening an A10,
Oh,
which an
really?
A10 is a pretty hard plane to start with.
Yeah, yeah.
But it turned out to not work out very well. But this other project, the Ice Chip project, I think is going to be really cool. I'm not involved in it. So for the listeners who are thinking she's endorsing her own project, no. I know people who are in it, but I'm really fascinated by the concept that they're going to be able to send these probes into the storms and get data about how the hail is growing all the
Right.
way through the storm, and that some of them might come back down as hailstones.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting stuff. I checked out a bit of your stuff online, and you have a course on AI. You talk about machine learning and
Yes,
evolutionary computation. Can you tell us a bit about that relationship between machine learning and evolutionary computation?
or and AI. I think that
Hmm.
the answer does start with AI, and that is that almost everything you hear about as AI in the news is ML. It's
Right.
machine learning.
Right.
It's just that the AI world, I like to tell people I've been doing AI since before AI was cool. There's there's AI out there that's not machine learning based. And the example I like to give for the sort of general audience is Google Maps, because Google Maps is getting you from point A to point B without any learning. Now there are places where you can do learning in there, but they generally are just giving you a straight search. And then the machine learning is giving you an adaptive answer, right? So it learns to adapt over time. One of the things that Google Maps is doing that's a good example of it lately is it actually tells you what your estimated traffic is based on your driving, or what your estimated arrival time is based on your driving habits and the current traffic and its predictions of how traffic have worked over time. So that's an adaptation.
Yeah.
Um, and then the evolutionary computation is more based on how biology is. It's sort of an inspired by how evolution works in general. And I would call it a very intelligent way to do search in large spaces,
Hmm.
so that you can it's my PhD thesis, I did reinforcement learning, and I view evolutionary computation as kind of a flip side of that coin. Reinforcement learning, you're getting feedback only from like numerical feedback from the environment. So it's like the kid learning to walk, the parents are giving them feedback. The environment's giving them feedback. They fall down and it hurts,
Right.
right? The robots tend to get numbers 1, 10, -5, whatever. Those are numbers you're trying to learn. The evolutionary computation is kind of the flip side because you're trying to evolve that policy of how to do it. And you're trying out a whole bunch of them at once. Those are all the chromosomes. And then the ones that are the fittest get to reproduce and make new
Right.
chromosomes, right? And that's it's you can use it to very efficiently search large spaces.
Hmm. Oh, very cool.
I haven't seen a lot of that for weather, by the way.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
I also have an AI ethics course. Did you find that one?
I did, but I couldn't crack into it. It said the data was not available. So,
Oh,
um,
that's no good. So I
yeah,
will fix the website because it should be up
absolutely.
and running.
Tell me about it. Tell me about this. What approach do you take?
We do it. It's a really fun class. So we talk about, I mean, I've done it twice now and it's been completely different both times because the space is evolving so
Yeah.
rapidly. This last time, we just dove a lot into policy and trying to understand what the existing governmental policies are for ethics regarding AI.
Hmm.
And it turns out that, in the United States, they're diving into it, but they don't have a whole lot of laws passed. In
Right.
Europe, they have the whole AI Act. And
They
so we dove a
do.
lot into that to see sort of how they differed and how they're regulating what they consider very dangerous AI that can't even exist versus looking at managing the risks. And if you get down to the very low risk part of the you can just, research great AI, they can do anything.
Yeah, right.
So we did a lot of that. We also looked at how you could ethically collect data and and the implications of what you're doing if you're not collecting that data ethically and what the implications are for the AI model. I think the most famous case of that exists that people know about is that you collect a database for face recognition and you collect it all on white faces. And shockingly, it doesn't recognize anything but white faces.
Yes. Yeah.
People just, somewhere in there, it was a whole bunch of white teams. So they didn't think about it till they came along. Somebody else
Yeah.
came along and said, wait, it's not seeing black faces.
Now, do you cover any foundational stuff in your ethics course? Do you talk about utilitarianism versus deontology, that kind
We
of thing?
did a little bit
Yeah.
in the beginning. It
Okay.
more focused on the application and the policy
Of
this year.
course.
I kind of let the class guide it to what the class is super interested in. And this year we actually had two people come from the US Congress and talk to us remotely over Zoom, but one was a representative and one was a staffer. But they came and gave a talk to my class. I mean, they were really interested in policy this year. So we did a lot of
Well,
that.
well, if you ever want a philosopher of science and ethics to do a guest lecture, you just let me know and I'll be there in a heartbeat. So,
I'm on sabbatical this year, so not teaching it this year, but I will be teaching it in the fall of 2025. So
yeah, cool. Yeah, I'd be happy to contribute in any way. Here's one you might like. In 1961, Edward Lorenz serendipitously discovered that small causes in large nonlinear systems like the weather can have huge effects.
yes,
In spawning the field of what is now called chaos theory, Lorenz's discovery of what is now the butterfly effect, so named because the nonlinear equations that govern the weather are so sensitive to initial conditions that a butterfly flapping its wings in the Philippines could set off a tornado in Oklahoma. As a result, he believed that long range weather forecasting was doomed because of such randomly and chaotic unpredictability. How has AI addressed such complex nonlinear systems as the weather?
that is an excellent question. I don't actually think we're doomed, but I do think we're doomed if we're trying to do it down to the very small
Yes,
scale.
the
I
granular
th
kind
the
of
granularity, the chaos is just too big and we
yeah.
can't do it. But AI has enabled us to look a lot farther than I think he ever thought was going to be
I
possible.
do
So
too. Yeah, right.
that's be my answer is that we can look at the global scale AI weather models that exist right now when we're recording this in October of 2024. And I say that date out loud because somebody might watch this a year from now and think, why didn't you talk about
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. No, good
Because it's
call.
changing so rapidly. But the the we can look, 10 days in advance and see hurricanes forming. So, for example, Hurricane Francine was predicted by the AIFS model from the ECMWF about 3 or 4 days before any of the numerical weather prediction models,
Mm,
the physics-based models predicted it. And so, that's something that we have dramatically changed. These AI models are oh, yeah, and the dog just got whisked away from below me. The AI models really are changing now. And I think that's something new. I think that the subseasonal prediction is still really hard. Like, let's say I want to do a heat wave 30 days in advance. Wouldn't that
right.
be awesome? If
It
I
would
could
be
tell you
great.
that it was going to be 110, sorry to the Celsius viewers, I
No,
don't
no, that's
think in
cool.
Celsius.
That's cool.
Um, but if I could tell you it was going to be 110 for a week in a row, and I could tell you that 3 to 4 weeks in advance, you could do a lot more preparation for
You
it.
could.
And I think that AI will get there. I don't think it's there yet, but it is going to improve our ability to do that. And how? I mean, you might ask how. I think the answer to that is it's finding the patterns that are hidden in these huge data sets that humans are just unable to do, right?
Yeah, this is one of the things in my book and in lectures I say, we use telescopes to see super far away. We use microscopes to see to the atomic level. Why aren't we just making bigger brains that we can't possibly fathom what they can and let them crunch the numbers, right?
Didn't Asimov make some of those?
He did. He did.
And the brain, I mean, in his iRobot series, the brain sometimes does good things and sometimes does not.
Yes, yeah. Actually, that's the organization I work for with convergence analysis. Our number one concern is mitigating AI existential risk. So we're
Right. There was one of those stories where the brain made choices about employing people and realizing that it wasn't going to work in one place and just suddenly everybody in that place had no jobs because the brain was like, but this is what I predicted it was going to happen in
yeah,
it.
yeah.
But wait a minute, did you talk to the people about it?
Yeah, that's why we can't really leave humans out of the loop, right? That's one of the
Yeah,
biggest worries is if these things become agentic and autonomous and we're not looking in on them, that could lead to, you know, unperceived and unpredicted consequences that could turn out to be
right.
they're nasty.
I'm
Uh,
always telling people in the weather part that we're not trying to make AI to replace the forecasters.
yeah,
We're trying to make AI to augment them.
of course.
I mean, we have a product I can give an example of a product that's in use operationally that identifies fronts. It finds cold fronts, warm fronts, fluid fronts, and stationary fronts, and dry ones. Right. And what it's doing is helping the forecasters make better forecasts quickly.
Mm,
Right. But it's not taking their jobs. It's just helping them identify the fronts faster because there's literally people whose job it is to sit there and draw the fronts.
yeah, yeah,
But now they can say, hey, wait, I can use this and now I can, triangulate it and look at my information and tell you what's going to happen a little more in the future because it didn't take so long.
yeah, yeah.
And that's a good use of AI.
Of course, of course. In the States, are there more volatile spots in the country, more difficult to predict the weather, whereas like San Diego is fairly, regular and, oh, it's
San
75 and
Diego's
sunny.
lovely.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's great. I love it. It's one of my favorite cities in the US. So, do you know, like, is there a super tough spot like Amherst, New York is the toughest city to predict weather for because of all the ways in which all these kind of forces come together?
That's an interesting question. I think there definitely are. I don't know what the toughest answer is,
Hmm.
but there's definitely local knowledge, and that I can say for sure,
Yes.
right? So somebody who's trained in Norman, Oklahoma gets dropped in, I don't know about Amherst, New York, but I actually went to school in UMass Amherst. So Amherst,
Ah,
Massachusetts,
there you go.
I can tell you from experience the weather is dramatically different between those two, right? And now if you're
Yeah,
a good meteorologist, you're going to retrain. But you can't, that's another way the AI models have to be trustworthy. And it's actually something that showed up in our study.
right.
One of the comments that showed up from the forecasters was just because it works in Oklahoma, I need to make sure it works in my area,
Yeah.
right? Because even the supercells between Oklahoma and Colorado are very different in how they form and what they do.
Oh, for sure.
Colorado doesn't tend to get the softball size hail, but my Lord, they get enough hail you have to shovel it.
I know.
So, I mean, I think the answer is I don't know of anywhere that's like particularly super hard to forecast if you have the local knowledge, but that the local knowledge is very specialized, right? There
Right.
are a couple places that are lacking in sensors that probably do add to the difficulty. So in particular in the Rockies, right? Because they don't have enough of the radars in the Rockies, and it's just gaps because hello, there's a mountain in the way.
Yeah.
The Southeast also has some of those challenges. So I don't know if you've ever looked at the radar map in the Southeast of the United States, but there are gaps in some of the more rural areas down there, and that can add to some challenges for tornadoes, for example, because they do
Yeah.
get some really strong tornadoes. They tend to be overnight tornadoes there, and they don't have the radar
Mm.
sensing for them, and so that's a real problem.
Right, right.
It isn't that it's harder to forecast; it's harder to see.
Mm. Hmm.
They know that they're there.
Right. And maybe folks, maybe we should just explain super fast. So, Tornado Alley is there centrally because of geography, right? Because of
Right.
those mountains, and because you've got the warm air coming up from the Gulf, right?
Yes.
And then the cold air comes down from the mountains and meets that warm air coming up from the Gulf, and it's that mixture, right, of cold and hot coming together all the way along the Rockies that contributes to this.
Yeah, I tend to think since you're talking about weather with me that your audience is mostly weather, but probably not all, right? And those dry lines, for example, are something that are really critical in making those tornadoes. And a dry line for people in the east are like, what's a dry line? They don't see dry lines. That's something that's really it's a dramatic change in humidity, and it's coming off of those mountains like you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And so it's super dry air, and when it hits the super moist air, and you got the wind shear at the right level, boop, you get
Yeah.
storms.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, wow.
It's actually part of how the climate change is shifting us too, right? We are more humid now.
Yeah. Now, what's the deal with hurricanes? Is this a fluke year, or is this, can you say for sure this is the result of climate
I don't
change?
think anybody who does climate change attribution will tell you that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to say for sure.
Right.
What they can say is that the rapid intensification is because the ocean is warmer.
Hmm. And by how many degrees do we know?
I am not a tropical cyclone specialist. I know it's a couple of degrees warmer right now. I
Right.
don't remember the precise number.
And these hurricanes, they come off the edge of like Africa and travel
Mhm.
across the ocean and build up strength coming across, right?
Yeah. And they also another thing that's been changed this year particularly, but it does modulate with El Nino and La Nina patterns, is
Right.
that the dust for Africa comes over and that can change how the hurricanes are behaving too, right? So the
Really?
Sahara sends its dust over to Texas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they
So
send these
Saharan dust
huge
is
dust
falling
storms.
on Texas.
Yes, yes. They send these
Interesting.
huge dust storms in the stratosphere and it
That is
affects how
that
the
is
tropical
wild,
cyclones are
weird
changing.
stuff. I did not know.
Yeah,
That's
it,
cool.
it it's very interesting how I mean, it's a global world, and
Yeah,
that's one of
yeah.
the cool things out of these AI models is they can do global
They
modeling now.
can. They can. No, this is good. Can AI tell us whether or not if we dropped an atomic bomb inside a hurricane, it would stop it?
One of my students talked about that in the ethics class.
Really?
Yes. Um, can it tell you? Probably. Should anybody be doing it? No.
What would happen if we did that? Would it just keep going and just taking nuclear fallout over to America? What would happen? Like
Probably.
like I'm not blaming Trump. Like sometimes I think it's nice to ask a question like you're in grade 5. Because it shows an innocence, right? A naivete. And sometimes we need to be innocent and ask the questions that the adults won't. So
So
in that respect, you know,
I had somebody email me when I first started doing tornado research who wanted to know if we could just stop the tornadoes by dropping enough liquid nitrogen into the storm.
there you go.
And, I was relatively new to doing tornado research. And I said, well, I don't think that you can. But, I went to my tornado friends and I said, explain to me, just like you're talking about, like a fifth grader, explain to me what I need to understand about this to understand precisely why it won't work. The answer is you probably can drop liquid nitrogen into the tornadoes enough to stop the tornado. However, it's so much liquid nitrogen that you have
Yeah.
now killed everybody on the ground
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
because you've gotten rid of all their oxygen, which is a kind of a bit of a problem. So I hope that you can't hear all that in the background. I think that the hurricane question is relatively similar, right? There probably is something. I do not want to speculate about nuclear.
Right.
I think there probably is something you could do to change the trajectory of it somehow, like
Interesting.
the path of how it's forming. But it would probably be so bad and the downstream consequences so
Right.
unanticipated that it would do really bad things. And since you're an author and talking about your book there was a really good book that came out recently, Neil Stephenson's book,
Mhm.
about climate modification. And it talks about sort of the unseen downstream consequences.
Mm.
They started in the book, they hypothetically start shooting, well, they really do it, but it's a book. So understand that it's done in the book, not for
Right.
real. They build these guns in South Texas and they start putting sulfur into the upper levels of the stratosphere to reflect back to make it, not as hot. And it works in some places, it makes the weather better, but in other places, it makes it worse because it has downstream modifications that happen.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that would be my answer to anything that's trying to change the hurricane.
Hmm.
Same as with the tornadoes. You're going to have downstream consequences
Yeah.
that are worse than you think.
Right. 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 Hmm.
Another question on those lines I once got asked is, could we just build a really tall wall? My answer to that is no.
Well, I like that kind of thinking, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of
it's
neat, right? Like, yeah, what if? I think we should encourage that type of questioning. I mean, everybody was down on Trump for asking it, and I thought, well, wait a minute. He has the right to ask that. It's like a child asking a question. If you don't know something, why not ask it, right?
you can ask it, but the problem is the downstream consequences. Like, for example, there are people who try to shoot guns into the hurricane. But now
Really?
yeah, like
Wow.
that's not a good plan. Just
No,
bullets flying around is just not a good
no
plan in anybody's
kidding.
minds.
No
So
kidding.
I feel the same about the other, stratospheric injections or any of the others. It's just
Yes,
like, but you asked the original question of could AI simulate some of this? I do actually think that AI could be a good way to
I do
simulate some of these
too.
things so that you could actually try to understand all of your consequences before you say decided you were going to do something. And by the way, I think that the world should agree on doing something if they're going to do something like that.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But maybe you could simulate by like simulating a huge volcanic eruption because maybe that would, that's a stratospheric injection, but it's
It
natural. But
is.
then you could see what happens if this volcano erupts. What happens if this volcano erupts? What does it do to the weather
Mm.
worldwide?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those
Yeah,
are reasonably good what if questions.
I think so. I think so.
I am, by the way, not advocating for climate modification, in case
Right.
anybody's listening to this. I think that that is a whole road I'm not ready to go down.
Okay. How about this then? Based on that kind of theme, I know some folks, and they're pretty convinced that chemtrails are real
No,
and that airplanes are seeding clouds essentially to for whatever reason. I often ask the Latin cui bono, who gains from this? What's the end game to seeding the sky with chemtrails? How do you deal with conspiracy theorists? Or do you ever have to? Do you ever see it online? And if
I'd
not, what
certainly
would you
see it
say?
online.
What would you say?
The problem with that one in particular is that cloud seeding is a real thing. People actually do cloud
Yeah,
seeding,
and for
right?
what
And so
purpose? For what purpose though?
typically they're trying to do one of two things: bring rain to an area or
Yeah.
keep the rain away from an area.
Right.
And there actually was even government research into that area for a while, and then they concluded that it wasn't particularly fruitful. But I think that that feeds the conspiracy theorists
Does.
because it did exist, right? But the concept, I think my single biggest answer is the concept that the government could make any sort of conspiracy like that and keep it quiet is
Yeah.
just
Like
laughable.
the moon
But
landing. Yeah.
exactly, how would you do that and fake it? Like there just isn't a way to do that. And I just, but it my answer is you just need to talk through it step by step.
Yeah.
The same answer. Like yes, cloud seeding did exist. People did try it. It wasn't very effective.
Right.
They were trying to keep like get more snow in one area or less snow or more rain or less rain, and it wasn't very effective.
Hmm.
But you just keep showing that like look, it wasn't effective, so people aren't doing it anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
I you just got to keep. It goes back to your transparency question. You just got to be transparent. You can't just pretend it didn't exist because it
You're right.
did.
You're right. No,
That
that's
feeds into the
that's good.
conspiracy.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um,
And by the way, contrails are a thing. And maybe maybe the next step on the chemtrails discussion is to talk about what contrails are and how they form and how
right.
they're just cloud water vapor.
Right.
But maybe people don't understand that because they don't have that basic understanding.
Yeah.
Well, how can a plane make a cloud without it being a chemtrail, right? And you
Yeah.
could if you can step into the physics and at least to some level, how do you think clouds form? Clouds are
Mhm.
condensed water droplets, and how could that happen with a plane? And maybe that could be another help. Just try to step through it.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a tough one. That's a
It
tough
is.
one.
It's also especially tough with all the counter information that's coming out.
And then every now and again, you get a so-called scientist claiming that he's got inside news about what they're really doing. And,
Yeah.
you've got to read my new book. And, I'm the one who knows what's really happening. And so that's
You're getting the other
unfortunate.
dog now, by the way.
Oh, I thought it was the same one.
Nope.
And who
They're
is
both
it?
schnauzers. This one's Daisy.
Daisy. That was my dog's mother's name.
Oh, it's a good name.
It is a good name and a good pup. Yes. Uh, Here's a fun question for you. Did you have role models growing up? And if so, who were they?
Um, Lots of them. Um, my mom has also got her PhD, so I
Oh, and
knew that,
what?
yeah, education. She was
Oh, cool.
superintendent of schools.
Oh, is that
But
right?
to have a strong female role model right there,
Yeah,
and she was always telling me I can do anything I want to do. My dad always agreed with her. My dad was in
right.
the Air Force. Um,
Cool.
and when I was okay, I can't remember precisely what year Sally Ride went up, but I watched Sally Ride go up, and I decided that I was going to be an astronaut. Yeah, clearly I'm not an astronaut, but that was, seeing the strong women be able
Yeah.
to do these things. Those were definitely some of the role models.
Does it go back to like what Rosie Franklin did with Crick and Watson, like how impressive she was in the discovery of DNA and
I don't think I was aware of any of that at
okay.
at the younger age, because a lot of that stuff, if it not being Crick and Watson, has
Hmm.
only come out in the last 15 years, where I already know the jaded view of how women are viewed in science.
Hmm.
I'm talking, you were asking role models of growing up, I'm thinking like 6 to 10 to 12, and when your teacher's like, my fifth grade math teacher said, because I was taking seventh grade math at the time, well, girls don't belong in advanced math. And, what did I do with that? Well, it happens that it helps to have been the superintendent's daughter at the time.
Yes.
I went home to my mother and I said, Mom, the math teacher says girls don't belong in advanced math. My mom said, I want it.
Yeah.
There was never any more comments about that from the teacher.
Your mom is Robert De Niro in Goodfellas. I'll take care of this. Don't worry, I'll take care of this.
But I mean, how many other kids were getting told that by this teacher
I
before they're,
know. I
like
know.
I, I you have to know you can do it. You
You
have to be
do.
able, and as a fifth grader, you can't turn around to the and say, "Oh, but I know I can not," like that. Just
Right.
you don't have that. You need to be able to not be told it.
Yeah, yeah. And so I notice a fair bit of STEM stuff on your website. Is that why you're very active in?
Yeah, because I think girls still get a lot of the messaging that it's not
Right.
cool.
All right. All right. Last question. What's next on your to-do list?
Well, I'm writing the renewal. I think you asked me in the beginning what I was doing in the day in the life of. I'm writing the renewal. I'm also writing another large scale grant.
Good
Yeah,
luck.
I agree. Writing another large scale proposal, focusing on extremes because the climate induced extremes are
Mm.
becoming more and more of a problem. Uh, so yeah, I guess that. Plus, I'm enjoying what I'm doing with private industry. I'm doing advising with private industry.
Oh,
So
is that
getting to
right?
see, yeah. So I'm advising a new startup company. I spent 3 years doing visiting faculty at Google, and then when that ended, I went and switched to becoming an advisor for a startup.
Oh, is that
It's actually got
right?
a bunch of ex-Google people in it, and we're doing AI for weather stuff. But we're trying to do open source and like democratize the ability for people to use weather. And I think that that's
Oh,
something. I
that's
mean, I'm
great.
really excited by the mission.
That's great. You've got an election coming up. Will
Yes,
the outcome affect whether or not you'll be successful in what you wish to accomplish? Will it become harder if one person gets in versus another?
possibly. I hope not.
Possibly. Like I've heard bad things about NOAA and things like that funding might be
The
cut.
I have certainly seen that, and that would be drastic. It would be really bad. There are people who don't understand that NOAA is providing the basic trustworthy services in weather, and it would be very bad.
Right, right. Well, let's keep the fingers crossed for your grant application and your political outcomes. Yeah,
Thank you.
you're
The
in
other
an
answer is vote.
vote. Yeah, get out and vote. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I have a pin on my backpack that we got when we went to get our flu shots. Oddly enough, they were doing registering to vote too there, and they had a pin because it's Oklahoma. We're big into football. It's the shape of a football, and it says "Democracy is not a spectator sport."
Hey, there you go. Good stuff. Well, that's wonderful. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me today, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you luck in your future endeavors,
Daisy says thank you too.
and Daisy, thank you as well.